Hey folks, Brian Bledsoe with you here once again, host of the Desert Farmer Podcast. Thanks so much for being with me here on Thursday, January 29th. I hope you all are doing well. I hope you've been surviving that latest cold blast that came through, which by and large was some of the more significant cold air we've seen in a while. Certainly the biggest blast of cold air to impact the plains so far this winter. Fortunately, though, it's gradually starting to relax a little bit and things are starting to warm back up as we go forward here. We've got a big episode on tap for you today. We're going to talk about a lot of things, not only kind of in the medium but long range, but I'm going to spend a good amount of time on some potential analog years coming up, especially from the important time from March right through September. So I have a lot of good things to share with you today. Before we get going, first of all, I want to talk about the sponsor of our podcast today, and that is Grund Beef Genetics. And they've got a huge bull sale coming up on Wednesday, February 25th. All right, right there in Sharon Springs, Kansas, and it's at 1 o'clock Mountain Time. Now, if you don't know anything about these folks, all you have to do is pretty much just ask around, and you're going to get a good idea of what they're about. But they have good cattle. They are cattle that pay. And most importantly to me, these are cattle that are coming from good people. And I'm 51 years old, and in the business that I spent some time in, some time, I'm saying 28, 30 years, and where I'm at now, I've really come to love dealing with good people in my own business at Brian Bledsoe Weather. And to me, there's a premium that comes with that too. And these are premium cattle. Whether you're looking for breed back, cattle disposition, calving ease, whatever you're looking for right there. This is, if you're in the market for some bulls and some high quality bulls, this is definitely one to check out. You can go to the hybridvigor.com and check it out for more information, or you can just hit yourself up right there with the QR code. But again, Wednesday, February 25th, there in Sharon Springs, Kansas at 1 o'clock Mountain Time. All right, let's get things going this morning. And look at what's going on the past, or has been going on for the past 60 days in terms of precipitation. And I think this is an important thing to break down. I know some just say we look at the 30-day or the 60 or the 90. In my mind, you kind of want to break things down more because in the plains, obviously, we can see one big event that kind of skews the data just a little bit. But a couple of things that I've been looking at here, the dryness that's pretty much encompassing this area right here from east central Wyoming down through western Nebraska, northeast Colorado, and into southwest Nebraska and far northwest Kansas. And outside of this dry spot that's back here, all right, for the past 60 days, we've got this that has been going on here. All right. And I'm kind of drawing this around because we've had some better moisture here in parts of eastern New Mexico and West Texas, especially with that last storm that came through. But most of that moisture missed northeast New Mexico. Most of it missed the far northern panhandle, Texas panhandle, and certainly the Oklahoma panhandle, and also up here in the southeast Colorado and far southwest Kansas. We haven't seen anything huge come through, but areas farther east are also not doing well until this last storm came through. So this is what it looked like from a 60-day perspective. Really, the only really wet areas have been confined up here across parts of Montana. Most of that came back in December. Same thing up there in the Dakotas. So if we narrow this scope to the past 30 days, this is what it looks like. All right. We obviously have good moisture in this quadrant here. All right. That's been going on. We have some pretty good moisture that's been going on here. All right. But that's really been about it. We are still dry and have been dry here in northeast New Mexico. Most of the Oklahoma and northern Texas panhandle has been in a deficit. And we've gotten dry here, okay, across Montana and extending southeastward and continuing this dryness here from east, northeast Wyoming down through western portions of Nebraska. This area here has gotten a little bit better with the storm that came through this last week. And we've been very, very dry across South Texas for the past 30 days. So there have been more dry areas over the past 30 days than there have been wet. To say the least. I mean, you can see all the brown and the red there on the map. Some of those precipitation deficits are actually pretty significant, especially for this time of year. And I'm talking to you folks up there in the northern plains and the northern Rockies too. So if we look at this in terms of the current drought monitor and what that looks like, you can kind of see where the areas that are in a little bit of trouble here. Again, southeast Wyoming, western Nebraska, most of western portions of New Mexico. And while things have been better here from West Texas and East and Southeast New Mexico, it isn't perfect. We've got severe to exceptional extreme drought down here over far southwest Texas. South Texas, that extreme drought is expanding there. And we have, some significant dryness that is still plaguing these areas right here. Now, again, I know it's wintertime. So when we are dealing with precipitation that's more in the form of rain, it's a little bit easier to change things up a little bit. However, we still have some issues to contend with here in terms of dryness, especially when you consider what the pattern has been dealing with. And this area out here, okay, interestingly enough, California, Western Nevada, right there, completely drought free. But most of the precipitation that took place out there to make them drought free took place in December and really early this month. After that pattern changed early this month, they have been bone dry out there. And I think that because we're moving through the heart of the wet season for areas farther out west, that's significant. When you have any kind of downtime, especially if it's significant downtime, that can really, tend to come up and bite you a little bit later. So that's where we're stacked right now. I want to spend a little bit of time and look at what the European extended model forecast looks like. This comes out every day, and it gives you an idea about what the next, month and a half looks like. It is certainly not the end all be all when it comes to this forecast, but it can give you an idea, and at least there's some things you can glean from it. It's not designed to pinpoint individual storms at that range. It's designed to give you an idea of what this is about. So when we look at this at the upper level weather pattern, all right, this is what we're looking at for the next 7 days. And I'm going to kind of break this down. This may be a little bit hard to wrap your mind around at first, but I'm going to put this in motion and go through the 7 day increments from now right through March 14th. And we'll kind of break that down to seven with an animation. So what we're seeing initially is this trough of low pressure in the Gulf of Alaska, big ridge here, trough that comes down like this. All right. So out here across the West Coast, you wonder why it's been so dry. Well, it's because that's where your ridge axis is right there. Why we've been cold in the plains? Because we're tapping that cold air or relatively colder air that's coming south like this. And we're still going to do that because we're going to run a storm up the East Coast, as we head into this weekend. But if we put this into motion, notice how the pattern changes a little bit. All right. And actually, in some cases, it changes a lot. So watch what this ridge does here out west. It retrogrades back here to the west near the Gulf of Alaska and the Aleutians. And what that does is it helps to carve out cold upper level low pressure here across parts of Canada down here into the US. That is the pattern that prevails for a good chunk of February and into early March. And what that blue means is just simply colder, more active type storm track that moves in here. Now, for most of the plains, we don't think of February as being a very active time in terms of precipitation. It can get really cold sometimes in February. We've seen that in the past, and this pattern, if nothing else, looks like after we get past, say, about the first 10 days of February, that period of time from, say, February 11th, 12th, in that time frame, right through early March is definitely going to be colder and more active here in the western half and even in the central portion of the United States. Is this a done deal that this happens? No, it's not. But the signal is pretty strong right now. And I think because that signal is not showing up in the first few days, it's actually showing up farther out. I think it bears some watching. So let's quantify that here in terms of precipitation anomalies and see what that looks like. We're going to do the same thing in that 7 day, 30-day anomaly kind of running time schedule right here. So what you're looking at right here, this is what the precipitation anomaly looks like in the forecast from tomorrow right through the end of February. So it's that 30-day period here where it's basically saying, hey, this quadrant, you're looking at drier than average. And then you're also looking at drier than average, certainly out here in the West. I think a lot of that could be front loaded in this pattern because of how dry it's been with that ridge situated over the West Coast. But if we put this into motion, notice how it changes here, especially across the Pacific Northwest, the Northern Rockies. We're even getting better snow in here in Wyoming, Western Colorado. And then some of that with the green here being above average precipitation, meanders its way out here into parts of the Central Plains and the upper Midwest. The problem here with this is this southern area here, at least from, say, Southern California, Western Arizona. I think you could probably connect the dots here across New Mexico as well. And obviously, into Texas, is still looking somewhat drier than average during that time. But being more active up here in this corridor would indicate to me we're going to have some storms come through like this, okay, kicking out of the west eventually and impacting the plains. What about the temperature trend? Well, kind of the same story. Obviously a lot colder than average farther east. A lot of that is front loading the pattern. We've been a lot warmer than average recently across central and southern Canada, down here into Montana and the Dakotas. But if we put this into motion, notice how it changes. All right, that warmer than average up here over the northern plains and northern Rockies goes away. It's replaced by colder than average. And then we generally just kind of stay colder than average here across the eastern part of the United States. So that period of time here, especially from mid February through mid March, is certainly showing up colder than average. Uh, I have to look at this and take it somewhat with a grain of salt initially, but the trend is pretty much undeniable. And the trend is that way because of the way the upper level pattern was situated. So I know it's been a relatively benign winter for a lot of us, save for areas outside of the upper Midwest and farther to the east. But we still have February and March to get through. And if this winter ends up being backloaded, like this particular version of this model suggests, it's something that we inevitably have to prepare for. And I'm going to talk more about that here in just a little bit when I dig into a little bit more of the analoging with what I want to show you today. So let's go ahead and look at the current state of the oceans. This is a 30-day animation from late December through today. So obviously we were dealing with the La Nina episode. You can see the changes that are taking place in this sector right here. This is where we were in late December, La Nina going, okay, all that colder than average water. And then watch how it changes. A lot of that colder than average water gets repositioned here across the central portion of the Pacific. Whenever you have either an El Nino or La Nina kind of positioned right there, the term for it is Madoki, which just simply means it's a Japanese word for the same but different. And what that means is that the La Nina or the El Nino is positioned differently, not like this all across the equator. It's more in the central Pacific. But even this, I think, is just the real tail end of this event, this La Nina event, where we maxed out in late November, then again in late December, and then we're trying to put this thing to bed. Now, the interesting thing about this whole area here across the Pacific is we've got really warm water pooled up here in the Western Pacific. Okay. We've got warmer than average water, certainly here, but a lot of that warmer than average water is making it all the way here to the west coast of North America. And with that in mind, as long as we are looking at warmer than average water here across along the west coast of North America, and we keep it there, that in many cases is a good recipe for active weather in the plains. And one of those regions in particular that's important is this area right here. All right, if this area here from the Baja all the way up to near Hawaii stays warmer than average, a lot of times that can invigorate a subtropical jet stream, bring better moisture chances and energy into the plains as we head into the springtime. When that part of the ocean is warmer than average, that's referred to as the positive or the warm phase of the Pacific meridional mode. When it's colder than average, a lot of times the reverse can happen, where we don't see as frequent of moisture chances. That subtropical jet stream is not in place like it can sometimes be with the seasonal change. So there's a lot changing right now with these oceans. One of those main things is the kind of the death of the La Nina episode that's going on right here. And you might ask yourself, well, what about the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation? Well, when you're this warm, all right, in this region here, and you are relatively cooler, okay, even though you may still be warmer than average, but you're not as warm as areas farther west, it still gives us a net negative in terms of the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. It doesn't have to be as negative as what we've seen, but it's probably still going to end up being somewhat negative. I am hopeful. I'm very hopeful. And I said this a few weeks ago when we talked about this very thing, that if we can build a significant El Nino episode here and keep this basin warmer than average, then that will give us a good chance for the PDO to possibly pop. All right. And by pop, I mean go up above neutral to maybe even positive territory. That's still ways down the road, but that's what our oceans look like right now. This is what the beneath the surface looks like. So over here on the upper left, think of this as Indonesia. Over here on the upper right, think of that as the west coast of South America. And then we go from the surface all the way down to 450 meters. So you can easily see what's been going on. The cooler than average water that's been pooled up here has been undercut by the warmer than average water that has been sloshing back farther to the east. And the reason it's been sloshing farther east is because the trade winds have really slowed down, considering where they were, back in the fall. So that allows the warmer water that I talked about a second ago in the West Pacific to slosh farther east and essentially replace that cooler than average water by a lot. That's a pretty significant change right there. This graphic right here is a forecast for trade winds. All right. So there's January 29th. That's today. And it's a 2 week forecast, takes us down to the 13th. I've shown this to you before. All right. But the greens and the blues are still easterly trade winds. I think this is probably one of the last bursts of those easterly trade winds that we're going to see with this La Nina event, because what's been going on, we've had some westerly wind bursts really show up here that are trying to make some advances farther east. And once these trade winds get out of here, it will be easier for those westerly wind bursts to make their way all the way across the equator in the Pacific Ocean. So this is also another thing, an important thing to look at that shows you just simply how not only the surface of the ocean is changing, but also the atmosphere is changing. Our latest Nino 3.4 index, again, is up here, right around negative 0.9. All right. So technically, we're still beneath that La Nina threshold of negative 0.5, at least from NOAA standards. But we have, since that last peak or, max out here later in December, you can see what we've done. We've kind of just stair-stepped our way up there, and I think we're going to continue to do that for the reasons that I have just mentioned. All right. And if we look at the latest Bureau of Meteorology forecast, when it looks at the relative Nino index, and you might ask yourself, well, what's the relative Nino index here? We've got all these different indices that we measure things with. Well, the folks over at the Bureau of Meteorology take the sea surface temperature anomalies that are there and they measure them in reference to the rest of the globe. All right. So if the rest of the oceans are warmer, all right, and we see just a little bit of cooling there, well, it's magnified because you've got a little bit of cooling in a big pool of warm. All right. And vice versa is the case. So when you look at the relative Nino index, and they measure things at the BOM a little bit differently. Instead of doing negative 0.5, they go negative 0.8. And instead of positive 0.5 for El Nino, they go to positive 0.8. So you can see that's what those dashed lines are. Anything beneath that dashed blue line, technically La Nina territory. Anything above the dashed red line, you're up here in El Nino territory. And you can see that its forecast clearly takes us up there, right there around El Nino. Even just the mean of those, all of these different gray lines are the members of the model. Okay. But right there, we're pretty much at that El Nino threshold in May, at least from the way the Bureau of Meteorology positions it. If you want to just skew it a little bit more, it's got us at a positive 0.4 there in April. So right there in that April to May timeframe is when El Nino could technically be classified, just simply by looking at this metric. All right. But I'm not necessarily only focused on that. I'm focused on how rapid that change takes place here over the next few months. We go from where we are right now, okay, all the way up to about 0.4 by the time April gets here. And that's a pretty significant change that is no doubt going to have some significant influence on what the weather pattern is going to be. So I showed you that with the European extended model. Is it too early to say that the sea surface temperature change is going to have an impact on that pattern? I think it's entirely possible that that's what we could be looking at. But I think it's important while we analyze this change to kind of look at what potential analogs could look like uh, this year from March through September. I was in Wichita a couple of days ago and I was sharing the same information. I'm going to be in Dodge City, tonight and over the next few days, even down around Liberal, sharing some of the same information because I think it's really important to look at this. Now, I want to qualify these analogs by saying you're never going to find a perfect analog. All right. So when you string a few together and you can see a little bit of a pattern, I think it's important to at least recognize that there is some pattern in the chaos with this. All right. So let's look at what some of these potential analogs look like for the month of March. And what qualifies this as a potential analog? Well, we are transitioning from La Nina toward El Nino. All right. We're just looking at that and seeing what that transition looks like in the past. So when you look in history, all right, you got 1951, 65, 72, 97, 09, 18, and 23. There's also some talk within the meteorological community that 2014 could kind of be lumped in there too, kind of based on what we're seeing now with the pattern. But the thing that I don't like about 2014 is that it actually took until the end of 2014 to see an El Nino materialize. If you want to say look at something pretty recently, as far as a year where we did a very rapid change, that was 23. And that's why it's right there. So let's look at the temperature anomalies first of all. And you can see, remember the European extended model that I showed you and how it turned off cool? We'll look at the late season cold that is still dominating here in these marches when you average them together across the northern tier of the country. But even back here across the Pacific Northwest and across parts of the northern Rockies, all of this kind of keeps the northern tier cooler. All right. But that's what the temperature anomalies look like in the marches of these years. What about precipitation anomalies? Well, because we are transitioning out of La Nina in these years, you get dryness that's still there across California, Nevada, southern Utah, eastern Colorado, eastern New Mexico, and right out here in the plains for the month of March. And then farther east, everything comes together more in a better fashion. And that's when you really start to see the moisture really light up along the Mississippi Valley and points eastward. All right. But you still have somewhat of a hangover, if you will, from the La Nina episode that keeps these areas back here to the west traditionally drier than average. Not completely dry. There will be storms come through. After all, it's going to be March, but just know that the tip here is to be drier than average when you take all those years and put them together. What about April? April, still late season cold coming down. All right. Like that. But we have warmth building down here across the South, particularly across, the western half of Texas, New Mexico, down here in Arizona. Why is that warmth significant? Well, the faster we really warm up here in the Southwest, a lot of times that can help to spur an earlier than average monsoon. So that's why that's significant. But you would think here with temperatures doing battle here that we would see some action here in the middle part of the country. So what do the precipitation anomalies look like? Well, you get some dryness here. And I don't think that this is something to ignore right away because some of this dryness that you're seeing here is in places right now where it has been dry, especially northeast Oklahoma, across Missouri, into the south and southeast Corn Belt, and also down here in the lower Mississippi Valley. Um, Areas farther west are not as dry. Um, Across most of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, southwest and south central Kansas, those areas performed better in these years during the month of April. What about May? May, the average was a lot warmer than average here across the northern tier, cooler than average down here across Texas and the southeast. All right. But those were the temperature anomalies associated with those Mays. Precipitation anomalies, look who lights up here. Okay. And I'm just going to kind of highlight it like this. And really, these areas here, the western part of the plains, traditionally gets real active in these Mays. Farther east, you can see the dryness that's still there. Okay. Early season dryness across parts of the eastern part of the plains and obviously into the Corn Belt. And you're also starting to dry out up here across the Pacific Northwest and the Northern Rockies. But those are the average Mays. What about June? The Junes are really interesting to look at here. If you live in eastern Colorado, western Nebraska, southeast Wyoming, western Kansas, down here into New Mexico and West Texas, go look at the June of 1965 because we had a persistent cold trough of low pressure here across the western U.S., and it just sent storm cluster after storm cluster after storm. There was a lot of flooding in that June across parts of the plains. But the interesting thing about that is how cool it shows up here in these Junes. And then if we look at the precipitation anomalies, as I said, the dry signal really relaxed across basically the majority of the plains. And then you had to go down here to East Texas and along the Gulf Coast to get drier than average by a significant margin there, and also up here across the Great Lakes. And a lot of times with the dry signal up here across the Great Lakes, we can have high pressure that's up here. So you get something like this. And what that ends up doing is pushing the moisture that's in the plains farther west to fuel these bigger storm clusters here across the western high plains and the southwest high plains. So you can see that transition on how it changes there from May to June with that. All right. What about July? Temperature anomalies for July, again, have been with these years, have been cooler than average everywhere you're seeing the blue, and then warmer than average here across parts of the south and the southwest. Precipitation anomalies, again, where it was wettest, these areas here, bullseye here. We also got wetter than average here across parts of the Mississippi Valley. We broke down some of that dryness there in northwest Wisconsin, eastern Minnesota, but you can still see some dryness scattered here across parts of the Corn Belt. Okay. And also dryness here across East and South Texas and across parts of the Four Corners area with a diminished monsoon signal. I'm not convinced that we're going to have a diminished monsoon signal this year. I'm just simply showing you what history has done in the past and some areas that we might have to look out for here. What about August? August also had cooler than average temperatures everywhere you're seeing here in the blues and the greens. You were still warmer than average here across East Texas. So July and August would be, hotter than average there across East Texas, and also drier than average here across East and South Texas with that in mind. And then you're wetter than average out here across the West. I think this is due to a pretty good monsoon plume coming northward. And then we're just recycling moisture here across the plains for the most part. After we get past that early dry signal here in the plains and across parts of the Mississippi and the Mid-South, all right, we turn things around here. And that's largely what happened in 23, where we were front loaded with dryness there, especially in the Corn Belt. And then once we got later in the summer, rain came and everything was okay. All right. But it's something to be at least a little bit cautious of if we've got that early season dryness. It's hard to ignore. All right. But that's what the August look like. If we go to September, all right, the thing that I'm interested in about September is because by September, if you believe where we're going in this El Nino, this transition to El Nino, then we should certainly be in El Nino by September. We'd be in that by July, but we would be certainly in it in September. And the years when El Nino is present in September, we get early season cold to come down here. Okay. And we still have late season warmth across this sector. So if we've got early season cold coming down here and late season warmth here, that would certainly be a recipe for active weather here in the middle part of the country for the month of September, at least in my mind, as these seasons are doing battle here. All right. And if you look at the precipitation anomalies that are associated with those years for September, it's certainly wet, all the way through here to get things going. No late season dryness with this. By late season, I mean late growing season dryness there. which is an interesting thing to look at there with these El Ninos as they move in. And no late season monsoon dryness here. There could actually be if we get an El Nino going and we keep that PMM warm, those warmer than average water, a lot of times can bring in remnant tropical storm or hurricane activity and moisture here into parts of the Southwest as we head into December. And some of that could even be hanging around even as we go to October. But for the sake of it today, we're just looking at that March through September timeframe. All right. It's kind of fun to look back at that stuff and share that with you. But my thoughts overall are this. I want you to be careful consuming the ENSO transition message because if you haven't been hearing a lot about it, you are going to be hearing a lot more about it as we go forward here over the next few months because NOAA's going to be all in on it. And then the press releases get sent out, and then all you see is El Nino everywhere. All right. But it's important to keep in mind that every phase shift and phase has their own nuances. So be careful what you wish for. Okay. I know a lot of folks that say, I'm clamoring for an El Nino. I want El Nino to come. Look, I don't want El Nino or La Nina because I don't want the weather regimes to get locked into one phase or another. And there can be El Nino years that end up dry. You just have to go back to 2023 and look at how dry and hot the summer was for Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and down along parts of the Gulf Coast. All right. That is not exactly what you wish for. So, like I said, be careful what you wish for with this. You've got to stay current with the transition to highlight not only the transition, but the speed of the transition here. Is there going to be any pause in this ENSO transition? I think that that's an important thing to continue to monitor. Don't be oversold by the message either. Okay. The future's hard, as you hear me say all the time. And pinpointing any specific analog is usually a fool's errand. So don't lock into the individual analog. Kind of take the body of work on what those analogs. Those were 7 years that I looked at right there. Okay. You can cherry pick years all you want, but really you need to kind of build a pattern in that chaos to at least have some sort of confidence that you're on the right track. And because of the modeling that I have seen and the analogs that I've seen, there isn't any really overarching, awful, dry drought signal showing up right now. Now, that doesn't mean that there won't be some dry time to skate through. Remember, I showed that to you in the analogs that there can be some early growing season dryness. All right. But through a large part of the plains, there is a good base right now. There is some good subsoil moisture to offer a bridge to that. And we're hoping to maybe build some of that as we go forward here. But there is some early season dryness that some of us are going to have to overcome. And then the message here, the generalized message, okay, without those hard specifics that will kind of get determined going forward. But that general message is that any of that early season dryness would tend to go away for a lot of areas as we go full blown into that transition to El Nino and things get fired up as they traditionally do. So that's what I want to share with you guys today. And these are going to be some things that I'm going to be updating, a lot over the next, over the next coming weeks or so, because it's a very important transition in the world of weather. And it usually has some pretty big impacts depending on where you are located in the country. So that's today's episode of the Desert Farmer Podcast. Again, as I always say, if there's something that I can do for you individually or collectively within your business with this type of material or daily material, I do all of this stuff for my clients that I have, folks. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can do so by hitting me up on my cell phone. You can email me, brian@brianbledsoeweather.com, or you can go to my website. I don't have a single map on my website. My website is simply a medium to get in touch with me so I can go to work for you. But that's all I have for you today, folks. I hope you're doing well. Take care. Have a great rest of your Thursday. And we'll be chatting with you again soon, right here on the Desert Farmer Podcast. Be well.